Hey everyone, and welcome to the final episode of season number 1 of Slay with Zay, and I am still your trans tutor. Yep, you heard that correct. This is the last episode of season 1, episode number 10. Woo! So, on this episode, we're just going to do a small recap of episodes 1 through 9. Not a long video, just a short recap. So, the whole crux of the entire first season was going to introduce people at a transgender 101 kind of level about what being a transgender person is at the societal level. You may have noticed that I didn't talk at all about hormones or surgeries or any of that kind of stuff, because ultimately none of those things make you a transgender person. You know, we go through body modifications and we do hormonal injections of some sort to align our body, our mind, and our spirit. But ultimately, you do not need any of those things to make you a transgender person. Because the reality is that you identify yourself even before you begin to even embark on that journey. So the hormones and the surgeries and whatever other stuff that people do in order to align themselves comes at a later date. So season 2 is going to be actually about the transition process. Now, again, I don't speak for every single transgender person. I only speak from my perspective and also from knowledge and information that I've gained from various sources. So every transition process will be different. So on season 2, you guys should let me know what things you want to cover. Of course, I'll be talking about hormones and I'll be talking about surgeries. I'll even be talking about relationships to a certain degree. But this first season, we just talked about the societal standpoint of how people interact with transgender people and how transgender people interact with others and the world around them. So let's do a small recap of the season 1 of Slay with Zay. Let's go. On episode number 1, we talked about the word itself, transgender, and what it means. So we found out the etymology of the word means to go across from one gender to the other. And of course, that's just basically working with the extremes. Trans man, trans masculine people, or trans woman, or trans feminine people. We didn't talk about the people in the middle until a later date. So I wanted to keep it kind of simple in the first episode. So we talked about the gender spectrum and how people can move from one side to the other side in various directions. And later we talked about how people may not go all the way across, or they may not be on the gender spectrum at all. So that was the first episode to introduce us to the idea of what being a transgender person is. Again, we talked about gender and how gender is separate and different from biology. So biological sex you are born with, you can change that. Your chromosomes are already preset based upon what life has given to you. But your gender is a societal construct that has been established, and there are rules that you follow based upon your gender. So women do this, men do this, girls do this, boys do this, feminine people do this, masculine people do this. So there are rules that we inherently follow in this culture. And on the second episode, we talked about the opposite word of transgender, which means cisgender. And of course, cis, C-I-S, is a prefix that means on the same side. So if transgender means to go across, cisgender means to be on the same side. So when someone is born transgender, that means that their gender and their biological sex are not on the same side. They are moving across the gender spectrum. But when someone is born cisgender, their gender and their biological sex are on the same side. So cis is not a derogatory term, and neither is trans. They're just medical terms that have been established over the years to ensure that no one's experience is devalued or diminished. So someone to be a cisgender person or someone to be a transgender person is just a fact and not anything derogatory. So let's go on to the next section. Cisgender and transgender established. Let's go on. On episode number 3, we covered gender versus biological sex. And that was kind of a heavy episode. And it's only because the idea in our society is that transgender people are ill, or there's something wrong with them, or they're confused, or something along those lines. Because obviously, your biological sex is the ultimate determining factor of your gender identity. And ultimately, it's not, because gender, and this is in various dictionaries, again, is a social construct. So, nothing medical, a social construct, but society plays a huge factor in our world. Medical also plays a huge factor. Your biological sex may be this, but we discovered that there can be some mishaps that go along the way. So my brain as a transgender woman could have been established as a woman or a female person, but then my genitals created something different. Mutations, they happen all the time. So maybe that's how transgender people came about from the very beginning of our existence. Mutations take place all the time. That's how we keep discovering new things. So, transgender people are natural people that are born with just slight mutations in their genes, perhaps. Gotta do more research and discover it. Maybe you could figure that out. So, your gender identity and your biological sex are just two different things. They can correlate and sometimes they don't correlate. One is being transgender and one is being cisgender. And then on episode number 4, we talked about your gender identity versus your sexual orientation and the whole LGBTIA plus community. And I know that was a long episode too, but that's because most of the time people get these two things conflated. So they like to lump us all together, and that's because we face some of the same struggles. Because people who are part of the LGBTQIA plus community are all facing the same kind of discrimination as far as who they're attracted to or who they lay down with. All that kind of stuff comes into play. And so we face some of the same struggles because we're outside of the heterosexual cisgender level of normativity. So we face some of the same scrutiny and some of the same traumas. So that's why we're all lumped together. But ultimately, your gender identity is going to be who you are as a person, who you go to bed as. And your sexual orientation is who you go to bed with. Okay? So, gender identity is separate from biological sex, and gender identity is also separate from your sexual orientation. All right? Let's keep going. On episode number 5, we talked about gender expansive folks. So by that, I mean, think of it as this. So queer or the LGBTQIA plus community is one umbrella. And then underneath that, we have the gender identity umbrella. Underneath that umbrella, we have transgender people. So underneath the transgender umbrella, which what we talked about, you can either be binary or you can be non-binary. So underneath the transgender umbrella, if you are binary, like myself, I am a transgender woman. I've elected one side of the binary, the feminine side, the woman side. On the other side, we have the trans man side of the binary. Okay? But people who are non-binary do not fit on either one of those. They're not a man nor a woman. They could fluctuate and move like gender fluid people or gender queer people. Those are non-binary characteristics. Or they may not be on the gender spectrum at all, and they could be considered neutrois or agender. So we talked about the pronouns that may go with that as well. You know, for trans feminine people, it could be she, her, and hers. And for trans masculine people, it is he, him, and his. For neutral, it could be they, them, and theirs. And even more advanced neutral is ze, zir, and zirs. So it's important to ask someone their pronouns. And we discovered that was a very important thing on that episode. So on episode number 6, we talked about gender norms and how they affect not only transgender people, but also cisgender people. But because this is Trans 101, we're going to keep talking about transgender people. So on episode 6, the gender norms affect transgender people because upon their birth, we figured out that their identity doesn't match the one that they were born with, which makes them transgender. But the idea of what a woman is supposed to do and what a man is supposed to do is very challenging and impedes or hurts not only transgender people, but cisgender people. When I, a trans woman, was born, I was born with the body and the idea of what a man is supposed to be. Of course, being a woman, I didn't fit into that category. So I had to fight through all of that in order to make it to where I am today. It was very challenging and much harder than it has to be. It's hard for cis women. It's even harder for trans women. And the same thing for trans masculine people. And people who are non-binary probably have to go through even more because they actually don't identify on the binary or their gender fluctuates. So it's important to make sure that we identify that gender norms can be hazardous to everyone at play. So let's go on to the next few episodes. On episode number 7, we talked about transphobia. Woo! So the fear or the aversion of transgender people. And that one is kind of self-explanatory, similar to the first 2 episodes. So someone who is transphobic or is a transphobe has an aversion or a dislike for transgender people. And ultimately, to me, and what I've discovered is that it's based upon knowledge and preconceived notions, or I should say, lack of knowledge and preconceived notions. So the important thing to do in order to combat that is to be gaining knowledge, like listening to me ramble on and on and on and on this video. So that's how you combat transphobia. If you don't, it leads into number 8 of episode's topics, which was about transgender statistics. And on that episode, we figured out how transphobia seeps from someone's personal life into their professional life, into their academic life, and even into the medical field. So this ends up harming quite a few people that are transgender, leaving them to turn to things like sex work, unemployment, medical problems like contracting HIV, homelessness, all kinds of things. So on that episode, it was a little bit dark. So I do apologize for that, but it's the reality of the situation. Because of transphobia and because of lack of knowledge and a lack of people in positions of power to assist us as a protected class, things have gotten out of hand. They've improved, but they've gotten out of hand. So we need to change those statistics to make them into a more positive light. On episode number 9, we talked about transgender history. So that was the episode right before this one, where we covered all the way back in the day, proving that we were here. We may not have used the language of transgender, but over time, we have completely shown that we've been here this entire time. We cover major things like Christine Jorgensen. We cover other amazing ventures, like when Laverne Cox was on the cover of the Time magazine. So, at this point in 2020, we are living in what we would like to call a transgender renaissance, where a lot of trans content is being promoted and uplifted. Be a part of that. Continue to uplift so our history can turn to something that is current and present and become beautiful. Okay? So, let's go ahead and wrap this episode on up. So for the last time on this season, thank you so much for watching these videos. So this season is about society, and how we as transgender people interact with our world, and how you as an ally or also another transgender person who's looking to seek information can also become more knowledgeable. Access books, watch YouTube videos, watch television, listen to podcasts, watch interviews of transgender people so they can elaborate and explain their experience. Remember, we are not monolithic, which means that we all don't have the same thoughts and opinions about our experiences. So it's important to gain more knowledge to eliminate transphobia, because ultimately that is the root of our problem. Ultimately, the lack of knowledge and the lack of understanding. So what you have to do is share this video. You can share it on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and you could subscribe to me on YouTube if you haven't already. Use the hashtag #SlayWithZay. And let me know what you guys want to talk about on season 2. I've got some things already brewing. It'll be back in 2021. So let me know what you guys think. And again, thank you from the bottom of my heart. This was an endeavor I wanted to try. So please let me know what you think. And please continue to support trans lives. So until next time, this has been your trans tutor, Zay. And I will see you on the next season of Slay with Zay.